I took a bunch of notes too, and as I read it, but the one thing that really stuck out with me is focusing on growth rather than the result. And I have heard that many times when you're setting your team goals to focus more on the growth, but then you get into a season and you start setting goals. You start figuring out how to set goals with your leaders on the team or with the team as a whole, and invariably it goes to get to win metros, to get to state, to beat prep. It's all goals that we that we can see, something that we can see an end to. And so when he started off talking about focusing on the growth and the emotional consistency with it, my thought was, yeah, but you're a professional coach and you have elite athletes that you have with you for a long time. And then I think it was in the next paragraph that they talked about how, he had a turnover in 4 years. He had all new players and he still kept that same goal system of focusing on character and then preparing and then performing and then not even worrying about the result as much. So that pyramid made a lot of sense to me. And it's something that I think at my program, I think we need to switch to that. We also have turnover every 3-4 years of all new players. And we need to stop worrying about, winning metros or getting to state and just work on, as a program, the total growth in our program. And I also like the human aspect of it. And I won't go into all that, but I'll let other people talk. But the human aspect, as opposed to worrying about as much of the technical and tactical things that we focus on in practice. That most of the things that kids are worried about and the things that keep them from being successful are more of those human issues. So.
On that human aspect piece of it. So in our conversation on Tuesday, we were talking about moving our middle and the growth process and how to celebrate that. And that's something that I think, as a programmer, as a coach, I've struggled with a lot, and being able to celebrate that piece of it and understand where that needs to be and how to help with that growth piece. That one thing that I'm interested to hear about today is just like, so you're talking about the human aspect of it, and how he talked about every time he does one of those player meetings that inevitably it ends up with everybody's Post-its are over on the human side versus the talent side. And when we go and have conversations with kids, and I know we talked about it a little bit yesterday or on Tuesday again about parents or whatever, but how do I convince a kid that, being a good person and being a good teammate is as important, if not more important, than taking another 40 reps in the cage? Not that they shouldn't be taking reps, but that needs to be just as big a focus, and how to get that buy-in from kids and stuff like that. And I'm in a unique position this year, to be honest with you guys, a little bit different. I had established a lot of this stuff. So I think I mentioned earlier, I read this first book about 5 years ago, and I started doing all this character stuff in my last program. And so I had established all that. And naively, ignorant, whatever you want to call it, I came in this year with that foundation intact to me, and I didn't have it intact into my kids. And we struggled communication wise because they didn't understand things that I was talking about. And again, naively, I forgot that I hadn't built that base. And so it's been kind of interesting. So I'm really curious, because you guys, especially you guys have been here at South for a while, is that the clientele's different from where I came from. And so I'm really kind of interested to hear, how you guys have worked with your kids and built that base and done that piece of it and focused on that human aspect and that growth piece. So anyways, that's what I got.
I want to jump in on that same piece. I had a very similar notes to that too, Coach Horton. So just reflecting after I read the first part, and I know you've been coaching longer than me, so please don't feel like you had to take my advice at all on this. But my point was that I, in my head, because I felt comfortable with what I was asking them to do, human aspect wise, caring for each other wise, I only covered it very briefly at the beginning of the season, my first year. And I was like, okay, good. We're all on the same page. That's the first thing we talked about. That's the most important thing in my head. And then I did not make it a point to continue that message throughout the majority of my time. And then it honestly like clicked after a hard loss last year. So my second year, when my captains stayed after a practice and said, we all just need to get on the same page about why you were subbing people into the game yesterday when we felt like we had a chance. And I said, this is multiple conversations, but I was not pleased with some of our very talented players' effort on the field. And I wanted to make a point early in the season that if we don't get our efforts straight, I would rather watch the girls that have been working their butt off in practice go out there and struggle. We ended up losing 5-0 to Marion. So, after that, we kickstarted our season after a great conversation, and we beat schools like Westside, Millard South, Elkhorn, the teams that we had to beat to stay competitive in that second tier. The second tier kind of is how it is in soccer, where there's the very, very top, and it's almost always the same teams. And then after that, we had to win those next ones. And I like looking back onto my season, we got the most success after we started communicating a lot more intentionally. So I don't know if that even speaks to the same thing, but that's something that I had to overcome big time in year 2.
I think as I listen to people talk early on here, the thing that just jumps out at me, and it's just our frustration as coaches, is we can see potential in our team, we can see potential in kids, but unfortunately we can't like crack open their heads and figure out what's going on, what's holding them back. And I think that's the important part on the human side, is it helps us begin to answer some of those questions. Like, we know these kids have some ceiling they put on themselves, or some rope that's holding them back. And that's, I really like the quote that's on the top of page 6. It just says, I found it's important to know the personal struggles of the people you're working with, because it can give you context about where they are, especially if it feels like they're hard to reach. And I think for coaches, a lot of times, some of our really talented kids can be hard to reach, and we can just beat our heads against a wall. But I guess in my experience, it often has very little to do with the sport or practice or whatever is going on, but there's some other thing. These kids just don't have great coping skills for the stresses in their lives. And, I think that's part of our job as coaches, is how do we help them cope with the things that they're dealing with, being able to set that aside for the moment, not because it's not important. We got to circle back and address that later on, but I don't know, just setting up a system to kind of deal with those human issues that at the end of the day is what doesn't matter what sport a kid's in. They're all dealing with some of those exact same human issues. So I don't know. It's just, I think the key part is it's an opportunity to figure those things out.
I guess I got a question with like the personal issues part. How do you deal with a kid who, obviously everybody has personal issues that they deem as personal issues, but how do you deal with the kid who, in the grand scheme of things, it is a completely minor thing, like it really is not, versus the kid who has to work 8 hours overnight to help pay for his family to live in their place type of thing? Like, how do you what's the messaging to help? Like, yes, I validate that you have a personal issue, but at the same time, like, there is much worse things that could be going on for you.
You mean like what you want to say in your head, like suck it up?
Well, obviously that's what you're gonna say in your head, but how do you still juggle at the same time? Like, kid A on your team's dealing with the fact that mom and dad took away my texting privileges, but kid B on the team's dealing with the fact that mom's got cancer or something like that. Like, how do you go about a conversation of like, yes, I understand that's a problem, but that really is not, like, in the grand scheme of things, that's not something that should be just like taking away from our performance per se. I don't really know the best way to word that.
I think I get at what you're asking, and I deal with this a lot. I mean, most of our cross country kids they've got pretty comfy lives. There's some kids that deal with some pretty serious stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one, it's for me to understand that, I mean, yeah, I coach all these kids that have all these different backgrounds. And so this kid, by comparison, his situation or her situation is pretty easy compared to that kid's, but that doesn't change the fact of what that kid is going through, right? For them, it is this difficult thing. So one is I have to take that perspective because they haven't experienced what other kids have gone through. So for them, it is this tough thing. But then two, I think we just have to be willing to say, hey, take 2-3 minutes and get it figured out. But if you don't, I'm just, maybe you need a day off of practice today. And I've sent some kids home for dealing with some things, whether they're big or little, it really doesn't matter because in their world, it's a big thing. And I've usually found that like once they leave once, they don't ever leave again. And, as they're recognizing, hey, I'm letting my team down through this if I'm not here and I'm not in a mentally right place. So I think sometimes it's, I'm going to give up this battle to try and win the war. And yeah, that person might be really, really important in the scheme of our practice of what's going on, but they're not if they're there with the mindset that they have. They're probably more of an anchor or a negative impact. And so sometimes it's just, I'm going to send you home and I'm going to expect you to come back tomorrow ready to go back to work. And I mean, sometimes I've even had kids on the spot, they leave and they come back 5 minutes later and they figure it out in the short term because I mean, it's just, I don't have time to deal with personal issues with everybody right in that moment. There's a time and a place to do that, but in practice is not the time and the place to do that. So, I mean, I love them all individually, but when I'm at practice, my focus and my mindset has to be on the team as a whole. And so we'll loop back and hit that, but I don't know. That's just my thoughts as I think about it. So
I'll take a crack at it, and I could start by saying that I always got a million ideas, and I think we try to implement things football-wise a little bit more each year. But one thing, part of our next step of what I want to do with our boys is do more community stuff, community outreach stuff, and get our kids out in community and help and get them serving others. Papillion La Vista is a relatively not a lot of drugs, crime, a lot of stuff to where, different parts of the rest of the metro area might struggle with. But so I've gone back and forth of, should we pour our time and resources into helping these neighborhoods or I don't even necessarily really know what it would look like yet. Or do we sort of do what you're talking about, Coach, is maybe help out more at homeless shelters and some other places to give them a little bit different perspective. I've also learned on that stuff that sometimes letting the action and letting just the thing itself speak for itself instead of doing a whole lot of pre-teaching and a whole lot of like making it a big lesson or whatever. The lesson is what it is, and each kid's going to take away something different from it, instead of like being really overt with this is why we're doing this and this is what it's more they'll get it. That's one idea that I've had that I think we need to do football wise. We need to do more of. And the other, I guess, when you were talking, I was thinking back to that video that we watched before we started reading the book of the guy doing the exercise and having them jot down all the things that will keep them from winning. And then I think he started getting into the video, starting to basically find antidotes to those things ahead of time. So when those things do arise, the kids have those skills and they've been practicing on overcoming some of those things that they had already pegged that are going to derail them from winning. So I agree with Coach H, and in that what's a big deal to me might not be a big deal to somebody else. That's small in comparison, I guess, but I think what we have to do, big picture, is teach them how to overcome whatever adversity that they're going through, and not, so So I don't have a lot of answers, but if nothing else, I'm just talking through on the football side, sort of how to address that thing.
We've had we've done the outreach thing. We went to St. Vincent de Paul's food pantry. We did that for about 5 or 6 years. Timing wise or whatever, we were never able to go down and like actually serve the people that came in and got the food or whatever, but they need a lot of help in the moving everything. They get these big gaylords. It's like 92,000 pounds of food or whatever. So I'd take the team in there. We'd spend like 4 hours and sort all the food and everything. And it became a highlight of our summer for our program. It was a really big deal. And I can be honest with you, when I left my last high school, I continued it, and I took the Titans down there, and they had a great opportunity to do it, and they really enjoyed it. We'll look to continue to do stuff like that. We're going to work with the Heartland hopefully in June. We got a date to go and work with those guys at the food bank and everything. And I couldn't agree with you more. Getting out in the community and teaching these kids that kind of stuff is very important. So.
I just wanted to hit on what some of you guys were talking about what's important for kids and things like that. And something I dealt with my own girls and with what happened with my wife. My oldest was going to gymnastics practice and having a hard time with everything and trying to focus on gymnastics, and would come home complaining that other girls were saying, that their back hurt and, this and that. What was going on in their life. And I finally had to stop her and I said, that is what's important in their life. Yes, you're dealing with something, but whatever they're dealing with, whether it be their hurt back or their dog dying or whatever, that is the biggest thing in their life right now. This is the biggest thing in your life right now. And I think as teammates, they have to understand that everybody else is dealing with something. And I know as a coach myself, we forget that kind of stuff. And even in the classroom, you forget that every kid's coming into your classroom or coming onto your field, and they're dealing with some kind of shit from that day or just in their life. And whatever it is, that's the biggest thing they're dealing with right now, whether it be boyfriend broke up with them or parents grounded them for their cell phone. That's what's on their mind right now. That's the biggest thing they're focused on. And it's tough to get past that. As a player, as a coach, as a parent even. But that's one lesson that I had to instill in my girls, that, you can't sit there and compare your problems to other people's problems, because whatever their problem is right now, that's the biggest thing in their life right now. So I'm just taking that to my classroom and looking at kids differently, and having my girls, being involved in sports, having them have that empathy for other kids that, yeah, they are dealing with something that I'm dealing with, my own thing, but they're dealing with something else too. So I think a lot of us tend to forget that, and kids too tend to forget that too, or don't even know and realize that. So anyway.
It's good, Jeff. I was gonna mention as far as a takeaway for me, I think I shared a little bit about this season for us. We had 7 seniors and we had 5 state medalists, which is more than we've ever had. We did the best we've ever done at the state meet, both placing wise and team points and all those kinds of things. And yet I walked away with, I wasn't jumping in the air for joy. And when I sat down to think about it, and I talked to a couple other coaches about this, and at first I was like, well, I'm not jumping for joy because we didn't win it, or we weren't runner up or top 5 or whatever, because that was one of our goals, was to be in the top 5. At the same time, we did better than we ever had in 17 years. And one of the things that I kind of stopped myself with was, we just did the best we have ever done. And what have you seen through some of these kids? So I go back to the growth and what was mentioned in the book and looking at banner 18, and I really liked what he said, and it's on page 15, and it says, even if we're fortunate enough to someday achieve that 18th banner for the Celtics, then the next day we're going to be pursuing 19. And so as nice as it is to win a state championship or be runner up or whatever that goal is, it starts right over the next day. And so I looked at that, and I actually, just in talking to the couple of coaches, kind of put me down back to a level of realizing kind of what it was all about. But and I've mentioned Tyler Robinson before, but he went from winning 5 matches his freshman year to being a state medalist, and signing a letter of intent to wrestle. And that's what it was all about. That's the growth that quite honestly we should be looking at more so than as Jeremy called it, maybe that target or otherwise. So I don't know. It was a big eye opener for me at the end of the year. Doing the best you've ever done, but yet at the same time it wasn't enough. It wasn't fulfilling for me at that time until I realized what everything was about. And he references that same exact thing right here in the text in that part. So anyway, that was a huge takeaway for me and a good reminder.
I love the line a couple paragraphs behind or down underneath what you pointed out, but just says when you focus on growth, that creates emotional consistency. And I just think so many of the kids that I coach are just emotional roller coasters because they're just in this comparison trap to whatever their goal might be, or this measurement of however they're going to measure success in their mind. That in my eyes, they could have run a worse race, but they medaled even though the competition was worse, and they're great, but we haven't really grown. And, the next day they run a better time, or the next meet, they run a better time against better competition, but they didn't place as high, and they're frustrated because they're focused on this goal or outcome-based thing. And I just really like that statement about emotional consistency, because I think that's something that all of our kids, I know my athletes especially, if we were more emotionally consistent, we're probably going to be more consistent performers day in and day out.
Yeah, Coach, you and I spoke about that in some form earlier this year. My question to you is, how do you keep the team focused when you're going to win the game? So for girls soccer, again, there are just teams where you walk in and you step on the field and it's already over. You're going to win. And the girls always walk away satisfied, and I always found myself walking away disappointed with, I would find a reason to say we didn't win fast enough, or we didn't dominate the way we should have, or something like that. And then the advice you gave me at that point, which I would just share with everyone else too, is it's not about that week. You got to stop focusing on that week or that practice or anything. Your goals are bigger than that. So if you explain to your girls before that week that, put it out on the table that we have to have a good practice because our end result of wanting to do well in the state tournament is still something that we have to work a lot towards, even though this next game is going to be something we feel good about. I think that was huge for my girls too. They grew from that conversation quite a bit.
It's easy in my sport. We don't have to worry about winning games for PowerPoints, for scheduling, for playoffs or anything like that. We just have to get ready for one day in October. So when we start meeting in June, if we get a meet in June, we're going to talk about October. And we use the phrase a lot, our eyes are on October, and trying to put meaning and significance to what we're doing today to later on down the road.
Yeah, I stole that too. I told them we have to go on a 2-game winning streak to go to state every year. That's all that we have to do. So let's get to where we need to get to. So when those 2 games come, we're ready. And that's just, districts for soccer is you play and then you're in the championship. If you win that, you're at state. So if you can put together a 2-game winning streak at the end of your season, you're going to state. And again, it alleviates a lot of the stress of the day-to-day season, trials that everybody faces.
I got a couple of things, and I'll keep it one thing at a time. To start, it kind of takes a step back a little bit, but as I was reading it, I mean, it took the very first page and it talked about, writing down what holds you back, things like that, and then asking the athlete, what are your personal struggles to do that. I don't know how you guys were, but immediately I actually, instead of the athlete, I started to think about my own personal struggles. And I'd love to find out what you guys, and by the way, my list is really long. But I'd love to hear what most of you, do you guys do that to yourself, and trying to figure out what you can do better before you would ask the athlete, and so on, take it with what you want, but I'll let you guys kind of take it from there.
First thing in track, I went immediately to myself in terms of it's mostly mental, but we don't put hardly anything involved in the mental side. I mean, we assume it takes care of itself in workouts. Like when we have a tough workout, like if McMahon has 8 200s that day, or if Coach Singer has mile repeats or something along those lines, where we think the mental side will be taken care of in terms of us building our guys up or trying to do all those things. And so I immediately went to looking at the mirror of terms of what am I doing to help the kids on the mental side. And again, I just assumed this was being taken care of, but we never, like Coach H said on Tuesday, if you don't provide that definition for the kids, it's not going to work out that well. And so it'll be one of those things that we do for next year in terms of, I work with Coach McMahon, the sprinters, in terms of being very direct with our kids in terms of this is what we're preparing you for, and spend more on the mental, quote unquote, toughness side. Because we just assume our kids are mentally tough because we as coaches, all of us have been there. Most of us are, like Coach H calls us, grinders. Not too many people are blessed with God-given athletic ability, and we just think we can grind our kids into toughness. Well, some kids with that grind mentality fall apart. They fall apart in practice, and we've all seen it at some point, whether it's in football, basketball, or track. I mean, wherever sport you're in, you've seen them literally fall apart mentally, and it's not a good thing to see. And so that's why when you said personally, that's how I view it in terms of my team, things that are holding me back.
For me, it's this, I have this image that I think I have to uphold because of what I preach and what I teach. And I feel like I have to be this perfect example of it. And I have conversations with kids about this all the time, is we can all put on faces and we can all put on fronts and we can all put on this great look. But at the end of the day, I know what I really think on the inside, and I know what I struggle with and what I deal with. But even with everything that I teach and preach, I think I've got to just recognize that I don't have to be perfect. And for me, it's this, I feel like as a coach, as a teacher, as a role model, I have this pressure of perfection that I probably put on myself and chase. When at the end of the day, when I think about the people who have had the biggest impact on me, it wasn't because they were perfect. It was because they were real and they were authentic. But that's an easy thing to say, and it's a hard thing to do. So that'd be my personal struggle.
I'll jump on here. Can you guys hear me with my headphones in? All right. I would say I got to take them off. This is bugging me. I would say my personal struggle would be being intentional and purposeful with everything that I do, whether it be building a relationship with athletes, which is something that has always come natural to me. But what I realized over the years is that I need to be more purposeful and more intentional to help that athlete get to where they want to be. So whether it be building a relationship or working on their mental attitude, their mental toughness, or whether it be in all aspects of coaching, I have to write some things down. I have to read a little bit. I have to get advice, and I have to figure out how to be more purposeful and intentional in all aspects of my coaching, instead of just having a good relationship with the guys, and then going out there and putting together a good practice plan. So that's something that I've always struggled with, because I tend to do things by the seat of my pants. I throw a practice plan together, go out there and wing it, and it works, and it's worked for 15 years. And what I've found over the last couple of years is I can get a lot more out of the boys if I am more purposeful and intentional with all aspects of my coaching.
On a similar note to that, I really struggle with delegating out what responsibilities I don't want to be in charge of. So like as a head coach, or really as a positional coach or anything, you have to delegate some things out. And I way too often find myself just saying, I'll take care of it, I'll send it to you, and then you just tell me what you think. And it gets in my way of trying to focus on, like, I'll make a list of what I want to actually care about, and then I get bogged down with a bunch of like gap filling small problems for maybe the rest of my staff. And I should just say, here's how you can fix that. Let me know if you need more help. But too often I try and do it myself, and it really gets in my way.
I'm going to add another one. I could have a long list as well. I hadn't thought about this till you put the question out, so they're just rolling through my head right now. But I think something else that I have to constantly remind myself of is that my program is a reflection of me, but it's not. Its success doesn't define my success, and I think our competitive sides of us as coaches is we can find our worth and our value and how our teams succeed in a worldly standpoint. But it reflects who I am, but it's not the definition of who I am. Coach Pullman with the hard-hitting question of the day. That was impressive.
Notice I didn't give you any of my answers. You would be here a long time. Actually, I got the second point I was going to make, and it got to Coach Jay Wright's stuff where, and I think we all remember that national championship game that they had where they said attitude, as they went into the final minutes of the game. And I thought back, and at times you don't always get that, or you don't know if you're getting that buy-in from kids all the time until it actually happens. And I mean, even just this last year, I saw it more and more. Our boys basketball team. I told you stories with the girls volleyball team about, state tournament, the things that you were preaching and you started to hear back from their own huddle. Great one was actually the football team, very first game of the year. And going into halftime, it's a tight game. I remember going in there thinking, this was before all the other coaches got in there. I get an opportunity just to, let's see what they're feeling. Go in, maybe say a few words. So I'm walking in there, and they're going through, and I'm thinking we got to get this team riled up a little bit better. We underestimated or something. Why is this game so close? And it was unbelievable. They all sat there, and I think it was, Dallas, it was Zach Circle. As I'm saying these things, and all of a sudden they're just like, Coach, we got this. And it was about as calm as I've ever seen. And they had prepared, and we always talked about preparation, and it just looked so in their eyes, in their faces, we've got this already. We know what's going to happen. They knew that they were already tired. They knew that we were stronger, that they had a feeling, and it wasn't anything I was saying. It was strictly coming from them, they were just had this look in their eye. And of course we saw what happened in the second half, but it was something, and I said there's been other sports that had this. It was a moment where you went, wow, this is all coming into play. Everything you think that you don't know, that if they're hearing you, if they're listening to you. You know, I've kept saying to as many teams as I can, always be the most prepared team under any circumstance. And we've done this even now as we're talking about all the COVID-19. I'm just saying, we're telling our kids we're prepared for this because we're going to be prepared for anything that comes in front of us. And so that was one of the things when I saw and read that, and they were talking about attitude. Well, hearing that stuff come from our own kids about things that we've preached and said, no, we're prepared for this. We're ready to fight for this. And, you know, the calmness from them, that makes you feel, as me as a coach, you start to go, maybe maybe they're picking this up. Maybe something's sinking in. And that's always a good feeling when you see something like that and you see it from other coaches saying the same thing. So that's why I always say, keep preaching that preparation. Keep preaching the fact that you are going to be the best because you do what it takes to be the best.
Something to piggyback off that preparation. I've had a conversation, I think, with Coach Cooley about this before. And I think John Oltman and I had a conversation about this one time as well. But like, we as coaches have been in this game for a long, long time. And when we think about our season, like, we know when those pressure points are going to come. But how intentional are we about preparing our kids specifically for those pressure points that happen in our season? And they happen every year, every single year. You know, and when I think about pressure points in different teams, I think about, okay, maybe it's your first loss, because very rarely are any of us going to go undefeated in a season, right? So that first loss is a pressure point. So have we prepared our kids for how they should handle that? Another pressure point for you teams that have to cut or make team selections, like, that's a pressure point in your season. That can be a moment that how that's handled, you know, can create drama in your team if it's not handled correctly. You know, so like preparing kids for, you know, when the varsity roster is going to get listed out or whatever it's going to be, like, those are moments that kids who are disappointed, you know, they can become an issue on our team. So if we prepared ahead of that for that moment to hit, because again, we know it's going to happen every single year. We deal with it year after year as coaches. So to your point of preparation, like, how do we get more intentional about prepping the kids? Like, this is going to come. When it does, here's how we respond. And then when it happens, you get out ahead of it before the emotion gets involved. I think that helps in terms of a preparation standpoint. Kind of like, to your point, I mean, Dallas and Zach had been prepared for that moment because, you know, maybe you guys realized that was going to happen or not, or you didn't know exactly when it's going to happen, but they realized, hey, we've been prepared for this, so we know how to respond in that moment. So I don't know, just thinking about as coaches, what are the things you see year after year after year that become hangups for our kids, and how do we be more upfront in investing in those moments so that they don't blow up into something bigger?
I don't want to hijack your thought there, but when you're talking, it made me think of something that I realized maybe a year or two ago. You're talking about how as coaches we get it, but the kids don't always get it. And I catch myself doing this sometimes, and I coach our coaches through doing this sometimes too, now that it dawned on me about 2 years ago. And that's the concept of saying, well, back when I was in high school, I would never have done this. Or when I was playing, I didn't do this, or I didn't think this and this and that. And I realized about 2 years ago, I grew up to become a coach. And so did you, and so did that guy. And when we get going around and sitting around as coaches, and we're talking like, well, the percentage of our kids who are going to go and become high school coaches is it's like tiny. So like, and it just hit me that, yeah, like off of a whole football team, there might be one or two kids that might maybe get into teaching and coaching. And, so it reminded me that absolutely we have to be intentional, and we can't assume anything. And we have to teach every single year over and over those things that we want to see the kids do.
I'll share one of my favorite takeaways. I've done a lot with this What Drives Winning stuff, but I think one of the best things this guys put out is the very end of our first section, that list of when is it hardest. And I just thought that was absolute gold in terms of working with kids. And the statement I loved that kind of attached to that was on page 32. He said, when you have the internal strength to be the person you want to be in difficult situations, that generates influence. And that's something that I talk a lot about with my athletes is, I mean, we could sit here about titles, but what's more important is you have influence over your teammates. And I just love that thought that if you show the strength to do what you say you want to do in hard situations, that's where your influence comes from. But then recognizing, like, when are those opportunities for influence going to arise? You know, I just love the thought process of that list. When is it hardest? Because then we can prepare a kid ahead of time to say, here's where your influence is really going to grow. I recognize that ahead of time so that when that moment happens, like, that thought is already there. Okay, I really need to focus on this because this is my chance to grow my influence on my team. And I just thought that list was phenomenal. So
I tell you, I did the same thing on that list. I went through the list and highlighted everything on each one that could be controlled at all by a coach. A lot of those things are personal. When you look at, you know, when is it hardest to remain competitive? A couple of those things we can't deal with as coaches. But when it says when the kid feels that the goal is out of reach, that is something that I can do by setting realistic goals. So I went through every one of those and did that exact same thing for that purpose, so that I can be more purposeful in a practice when I see a kid struggling and can figure out how to deal with it. I love that list too. That was great.
anybody else got a takeaway they want to share here?
Sure, I got one. I really enjoyed the Brad Stevens, the number 18. So we, when I'm coaching, sometimes we have those banners hanging, and I feel like kids can get hung up on the banners. And I've been part of teams that have won nothing, and part of teams that have won 5 state trophies in a row. And I thought that number 18, you always want that goal to be that banner, but then you can be part of teams that just get so hung up, and that's their whole thing. And all they can focus on then is that banner at the end. And they forget about that day to day, and they forget about the small little goals and just improving from, you know, that weekly, or just that meet, or just that race, or just, you know, whatever that next game is. And they start forgetting about those things, and they let that overcome them. And I've been part of teams let that consume them, and just that pressure, I feel like it builds on them, and it's so weighing. But if you forget about that, yeah, that's your end goal, is banner number 18. Okay. But just, you really need to focus about this practice. You really need to focus on that next race. You really need to focus on that. I thought that's something, you know, that could be really kind of mentally easing to teams like that I've seen issues with. I thought that was kind of a cool part.
My takeaway was probably the biggest one for me was Brad Stevens as well. A couple from him, but one being the when he said that he was proud to be a member of the team. You know, implying the being just a part of the team rather than being the coaching authority figure. And, you know, the reason I like that is, you know, the more I do this, the more I realize that I don't know everything. And to me, that kind of takes pressure off me. Like, I'm a part of this team, and I've said that to my girls multiple times, and, you know, just the last couple of years, you know, like, I'd been texting with Nina Cuevas. You know, she had every chance to be state champion in the 100, set the school record, be our number 2 all-time most successful track athlete in the program. And I really screwed up the first 2 years. Like, just ridiculous, like didn't utilize her talents the way that they should have been utilized. So I, when texting her, I'm just like, hey, I'm really proud of you, and I thank you for putting up with me in your first 2 years when I didn't know what I was doing. And so I like that. I like the member of the team, and I think I even said that in my email that I sent out to the girls, that I just enjoy being a member of the team, and I don't know everything. I'm trying to figure out a lot of things the way that you are. So that's one thing. And this is tongue in cheek, but with Stevens, he's like, oh yeah, you've got your pyramid here, but you could probably put another big wide base to the pyramid that says talent. I'm like, come on, like, I don't know. That's all this stuff about character and all this sort of stuff. I get it. I understand it. But at the same time, even he's sitting there saying, all things being equal, if all things are equal, this stuff comes into play. But if you don't have the big wide base, which magically disappears from my pyramid, then it doesn't matter. So I was kind of put off by that little. I love Brad Stevens, but I was kind of irritated by here's the bottom of the pyramid that exists, but we're not going to put it there because it doesn't fit into this story. So anyway, kind of tongue in cheek, but that did kind of rub me the wrong way when I read that part.
I think we'd all agree, if we don't have talent, we can do all these things, and we might. I struggle with the whole, at times, the message of character, because I truly believe it. But at the end of the day, I'm also a competitive person, and I want to win.
Correct.
I'm not going to sit here and do all this stuff if I don't think it's going to help us win.
Correct.
And I wouldn't be in coaching if I didn't think I could win. And win doesn't mean state titles. Win in my mind is just, it used to mean state titles, but now it just means can we achieve what our potential is as a team. But at the same time, as I shared with you guys on Tuesday, my minimum standard for our program is to be a top 5 team in the state. So I'm not ever going to separate what we're trying to chase after, and it's something big. I'm not going to hide from that either. So yeah, I can relate to your struggle with the talent comment. So take away Kaylee Cruz and some other people on our team, and I'm probably not the happy-go-lucky guy that I am. I'm probably a lot more crabby. So
yeah, talk to me next year.
I think Coach H, what you're saying too, key to what you consider as success, if you've maximized the talent that you have.
Yeah.
And you're right, winning and losing, obviously I want goals. We should have goals set as high as they possibly can. State championships all across the board. Understanding that, well, that's tough, but is still an ultimate goal. But if you've maximized what you have, you could consider that a success too.
Agreed. Maximizing potential. That's the big word there, I feel like.
Yeah.
The word potential is another thing that we have to define and close the gap in communication with kids, because when I talk potential and they talk potential, those are two different things. And sometimes it's flip-flopped in terms of whose potential definition is higher. So I have a lot of kids who walk in and have never run a mile before that think they're going to be a varsity runner. And I'm not for crushing dreams, but I'm also a realist. So I'm not going to have a realistic expectation here. Any other takeaways from anybody?
I'm gonna keep giving you the compliments today, Coach H. When you helped me a lot a couple of years ago when I first started with this is a lot of the same stuff that we talked about how I could lay the foundation. And something that you mentioned to me was there's 2,000 kids in the school, half of them are girls, and I believe that when there's that many people in our building, there's a state championship roster somewhere. I just got to find it and make it work. So something that I've really struggled with is comparing our talent to other teams' talent, and that almost never gets me anywhere. But I guess the point of all of this is something that I still struggle with is when my athletes also know that the other team is just truly a better version of what we are, that's when, and maybe it's, I don't know if it's only a girls' side thing. I would like to hear if any of the boys coaches have this same thing happen, but that seems to be the most mentally draining part for my athletes. And then probably another thing that I'd like to improve from Coach Pullman's conversation earlier about myself is I think I let that affect me as well. When I see their shoulders shrug, I look around and I'm like, oh boy, you know, I'm supposed to be the person that keeps this consistent, but now I'm kind of falling into the same feelings that they're having where this could be a long day.
Well, I'll share from the boys soccer side real quick. Very similar to the girls soccer side. There's a couple elite teams like Omaha South, Prep West Side, Millard West, and then there's kind of the next group that like Papio South, where we can compete with them, but we just do not have that type of talent. And I've run into that same thing: is how do I convince these boys that they can play with those top, 4 teams that we run into several times a year. But I think boys tend to be a little more overconfident than girls. A lot of times our boys will go into those games with kind of a cocky attitude, like, we got this, we're good. And then when they get into it, that's when they hit a wall and they're like, wow, these guys are really good. They've prepared even better than we are. And so that's what I run into on the boys side. But yeah, when you find the answer, let me know.
If you go back and look at the history of our girls cross country program, we were the first 5 years, we were the oh so close program to qualifying for state or whatnot. And back in that time, Marion was the dominant girls cross country team. They'd won like 9 state championships in a row. And as a coach, that's what I was chasing after for a program. And so I steal a lot of things, like anything that I share with any of you. I'm not that creative a person, but I've stolen it from somewhere else and maybe added a little bit of my own thought to it. But a lot of successful runners will break a race down into smaller parts. And so that's what we started to do in our chase of Marion, is we just broke it down into smaller parts. Like, okay, what if, we can, in cross country, let's be within 40 points of Marion. And we made that a goal. It was realistic. It was attainable. And we started to shrink the gap of who they were in our eyes to where we were. And it's, the hard part is, it's not something that's going to take root in a year. So when you're thinking about helping this team this year in that way, I don't think there's any short-term solutions to that mindset. But again, as coaches, we're in this a little bit more for the long haul. So I think you've got to start breaking that down. How can we close the gap and make that gap smaller? And then all of a sudden, a few years down the road, you don't see that gap anymore. I don't know. That's kind of my thought on it. Cooley and I talked about that with the boys basketball team in Millard North this year. But you guys had the opportunity to play them a whole bunch of times and close that gap within a season. And in that same conversation, Clemenger, we talked about how much of a challenge that is for the football team. You guys probably have the fewest number of games of anybody. And that's a much more challenging thing to do in your situation than it is for some of us and our others. So.
Yeah, we're still trying to figure it out. And I don't have any surefire things, but I just have some just simple beliefs that we're sticking to. And it's all the things that you talked about. Goes back to this book about improvement, and focusing on that. One of the first things that I was told as a head coach was celebrate success. So even if small successes, you got to celebrate those things. And the one thing, and I laugh because it's crazy, but the one thing with our sport is it is a physical sport, and there's like physical collisions and physical like aggression and nastiness and stuff, and like, so when you face an opponent that is just flat out better than you, it's hard to catch them on a bad day, or it's hard to like really, if they're a tier 1 team and you're a tier 3 team, it's hard to, I'm not saying it's impossible, but that gap is hard. It's really hard. And I think part of it goes back to just the physical, like literally getting pushed down, literally, and sometimes midway through that first quarter, it's tough just to, it's all right, guys, just, stick with it. And kids got welts on their, elbows and I don't know, stuff like that. So that's me pouting again. So I'll shut up.
I think it can be done in the season. I know we just said long term, but we think about communicating as a team, but I think just communicating individually one-on-one with people is vital. And Coach Heiser always does a great job of it. In January, he'll send out 10 reminders within a week span about this is the time where people start breaking down a little bit. Their minds start wandering. It's a grind of the season. We need to over communicate with these guys. It doesn't matter how well we're doing this year, JV varsity, just preaching program wide, over communicating. And then when it's I just think if there's one-on-one conversations, Coach Watson talked about delegating earlier. And I think maybe we think about delegating responsibilities, X's and O's wise, but are we delegating conversations as well? It doesn't just have to be the head coach talking to 100 people, 20 people, 12 people, whatever it is. And each coach within the staff has a different set of skills that'll be best used with each individual. And are we utilizing the staff? I mean, Coach Heiser does such a good job with that. Because anybody can, when things are going good, beginning of the season, everybody's great. And then when are those pressure points coming? And they're coming. And, Coach H used are we getting out ahead of it? But just the conversation with people, I think non-X's and O's wise, do they feel valued? Do they feel appreciated? Do they feel like they have a significant role on the team? Do they feel like they're getting better? And just constantly hammering home that message. I know when things weren't all that great with our start this year with basketball, we were 1-3, but we do classroom time and talk about these things. So when you see the Jay Wright attitude video, coach showed that to the guys probably right before we played. Yeah, it was the game we beat Omaha South at Metro. And we got out to in the third quarter, we opened it up to about a 13-point lead. And then they came back, actually took the lead, and coming back to the bench and just thinking of how do you translate what the coaches say and translate it to get the players to say it. As the players are coming off, everybody's yelling attitude, attitude, attitude. It didn't come from one coach. They just believed in that message there. And so all this stuff, this is great for us to talk about. And Coach Johansson, what drives winning teams? In parentheses, it should say talent. It should, no doubt about it. But I still think even if you're one tier lower than the competition, this is what can get you there. Chemistry can be an equalizer. And just better people, that's that All Blacks rugby team. Better people make better Titans. And I think that's what this is all about. Better people are going to make better Titan teams. Better people are going to make us get to that next level. And you talk about moving the middle. This is a separator, I'd say. You probably move the middle more mentally than you can physically. That's just my thoughts.
Yep.
I'd kind of like to piggyback off what Cooley's saying, being with the football program for so long, that I know there used to be a time where our kids were flat out scared to play the Monarchs. First game of the year, that's all they would talk about in the summer. Of course, we still play in first game, and they still talk about it all summer. But we'd go into that game, and we lost the game before we even started. Now, on the flip end of things, that we've won a few here and there, our kids aren't scared of the Monarchs. They think the Monarchs are a lesser opponent than what we are. So that whole mindset towards them has changed. Now, Cooley, when you're talking about talent, yeah, I don't think they have the talent that they used to. But we've definitely overcome that mindset that, yeah, we like what Coach Pullman was saying about that first game of this year. They came at halftime and said, we know we're going to beat them. We know we're going to take care of it in the second half. Whereas before, if we would, 7, 8 years before, it would have been a whole different mindset. We wouldn't have been in that mindset at halftime. We would have been shitting our pants saying, what do we got to do now? What's going to happen? I think our new team, and Coach Clem would attest to it, it's Bellevue West. Legit, our kids are scared to play them. Now, they've got some darn good talent, but I think even if they didn't have the talent right now, when those studs are all gone, I think if we put the pads on again this year and played them, our kids would be scared just because of what they've accomplished and what they've done. In football, like you said earlier, somebody said earlier, we don't have that many games, and it is hard to overcome that in a season. It's a whole mindset growth. It's a whole and we addressed it this summer at our camps and things like that, but it's got to be one of those things that continuously look what we did this year. Look what we did this year compared to that, last year, what we did against that team. So we've overcome that hurdle in a few places, but then there's other ones where, man, they just our kids are scared, and whether they will admit it or not, they are. So, but it's talent.
I think one shift I've noticed just in watching, and I don't coach the guys at Papio South, just having conversations with them. It always seemed for the longest time like some of our best athletes were just happy to be the best Papio South athlete. And I kind of feel like there's been a shift that in our guys are looking outside of our building walls and trying to compete more against, am I the best in the metro or the state? I just feel like some of our best athletes right now have kind of raised their own vision of themselves and maybe what their target is for themselves. And hopefully that's something that we can continue to see in the next couple of years. So I think our girls have always kind of been a little bit ahead of our guys in that area. But I feel like our guys have gotten a lot better. That's just my 2 cents.
Kind of the opposite of that, though, Coach H. Would you agree some of our biggest problems on the girls' track teams is when they're not the best in the school?
Heck yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of a weird dynamic. Like, we rarely have issues with the girls. Oh, that girl from Marion's faster than us or better than us. But when they realize that they're the second best in an event at school, just deflating. So kind of a weird dynamic where they're not scared of other people, but once they realize they're number 2 here at Papio South, it's a whole different world.
Yeah.
I've always kind of wondered how you play that mental game in cross country when you got 6 girls fighting for those 6 spots. And we know that there is oftentimes a lot of extra feelings or drama with girls, but it seems like over the last few years, especially I've watched your program, you've done a really good job where the 7th, 8th, 9th girls are rooting for them as they're trying to compete for that 5th or 6th spot, and that their attitude is 100% behind those girls. So anything you could share about that?
Yeah, and it's probably not what you think. Like I'm a male coach of females, so Coach Young could probably address this way better than I could. I read a book called Confidence Code, which is a book written by women for women about confidence, and it just like opened my eyes. Like there's this curtain pulled back, and the biggest thing that we deal with in cross country in terms of getting kids to compete for spots is actually like not getting mad when somebody beats me, but like going and beating somebody and knowing that they're not going to be mad at me. Like I have to give my freshmen permission to go and beat somebody ahead of them because they're more worried, like if I beat them, well, then they're not going to like me and they're not going to be my friend. And it's not, it's almost the other way around. And it's so foreign to me. I don't think that way at all. But again, it's something that I think I've gotten better at recognizing, and it's been coaching girls for 18 years now. And kind of in the last couple of years, I think I've gotten better at recognizing that, but it's like, if we're going to be the best team that we can possibly be, we had better be competing for spots. And if you're not beating somebody that you can beat on our team, you're not helping us get better. You're actually, you're an anchor to where we're at. And I mean, my spot's a little bit easier than you guys. I don't choose who our varsity starters are. A stopwatch does. And so I'm going to give you all the exact same opportunity to be in that spot, but 7 of you are going to end up there. And then when 7 of you are there, you better believe that I'm coaching 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. I am coaching them to take your spot. And I'm not going to hide about that. Like, that's my job as a coach, if that's going to make us the best team that we can be. So for you to understand that, yeah, I'm rooting for you to get that spot, but then when you have it, I'm coaching somebody else to take it from you. And I hope you keep it. But if you don't, somebody's going to be ready to take it. And I don't know. That's kind of the mindset I've taken in that. And just, we try to celebrate things as a team. That's another advantage I have. All of our kids practice together all the time. So if our varsity team accomplishes something, our JV team gets credit for that as well, because those kids help move them to that position. So those are the thoughts off the top of my head.
This is interesting stuff when it comes to, I was just about to type it, but when you try to coach girls versus guys, and I'm coaching both, and as much as I like to say that I'm going to coach them completely the same, there is a switch that I tend to flip on and off, whether I know it or not. Sometimes things carry over, but not always. There is actually a difference of how I may approach certain ones. But that may be individualized, even just individual too. I mean, there's going to be ways I coach certain kids, but still there is an automatic switch that turns from when I'm coaching guys versus girls. And I don't know if some of you have had that other issue, if you've had to coach guys, both sides of it. But that's my thoughts on it.
Same for me. I completely changed my approach and attitude for when I'm coaching a female versus I'm walking up to a boy in the powerlifting room. One, because I have to prove myself to the male athletes, I think a lot more than I do the female athletes. But as I continue to be in the weight room more and more, I generally become known. But it's kind of a thing where I have to prove myself before I'm respected. And I think coaching both offers kind of a fun perspective, just because I get to see how coaching males is so much different. And I think it gets me thinking a little bit differently, because like Coach H, you said, reading a book about women for women kind of blows your mind a little bit. Me coaching males makes me think a lot different. And so I put in the chat, men are waffles and we are spaghetti. So that's something to think about when you're coaching girls versus boys. When the boys walk off the court, often it's on the court and it's staying on the court. But if she beat me or she said the wrong thing to me on the court, I'm going to remember that in the classroom, and I'm going to remember that 24 years from now, that on December 14th, she wronged me. And here's how she wronged me. We're spaghetti.
I've coached club soccer for 18 years also, but I took this last year off, but the last 4 years I coached girls high school soccer in club, still coach the boys in high school. Opened my eyes. Totally different. I won't go into all the differences I found out, but I had to really change my approach and how I coached when I had girls, and I think it made me a lot better coach. I think that's part of what started me thinking more about being more intentional and purposeful with how I do things, is because I had to think that way when I started coaching girls.
And how you say things.
Mm-hmm.
I've also observed, and you can tell me if I'm off the wall on this thought, but for those of you who've coached guys for a long time, when I think back to guys and how I interacted with males in the classroom when I first started teaching 20 years ago to how I interact with males in the classroom now, I almost feel like I have better success with guys if I bring my female coaching mentality to them in the classroom. And I don't know. I've been thinking, like, why is that? And I wonder if the elevation of youth sports has had an impact on that. You know, like for us guys, we kind of like figured out this hierarchy on, you know, when I was growing up, and you know, when you're playing backyard football and basketball, and you figure out all these things. And I think girls are more social creatures by nature than guys are. And for us guys, we've kind of lost, I think young men, I should say, like our kids growing up now, they've lost that social structure through sports because everything is so parent or adult driven through youth sports. I don't know. I'm just curious what those of you who coach guys, if you've noticed a shift in that over time. And I don't think it's just a generational difference. I think there is something uniquely different to it. So just a question.
Since I coach both, I definitely have noticed. I feel like now I went from coaching girls and guys, and sometimes I had to coach a girl like a guy. Sometimes I had to coach a guy like a girl. And now I feel like I coach I feel like I'm coaching both my teams like girls, but not to be just kind of like the way I treat them all now is kind of more that side the way than I used to. It's just the way I'm going to treat everybody now. And the more like you said, just you have to be much more purposeful, I feel like, in what you say, and just some of the emotional needs, I feel like, are very similar now, to where I think that they take things, a lot of the guys have take things a lot more personal when you say things, and I think you got to be a lot more sensitive to how you're saying things to them. But at the same time, then, you know, there's some, I feel like, you know, which I would just say the old school that, you know, that will have a couple then that absolutely don't care about anything. Like, coach, just cut it to me straight, you know, just tell me, you know, and they want, so there still is, but I've gone to probably treat the teams a little bit differently, to where I just treat them all now, where I would say to more like I used to coach just kind of the girls team.
I think that ties back to, like, on page 33, it says get the players to take ownership of who they want to be. I think you said it there. We got to coach the kids how they need to be coached. And I always take into account, like, how much media input they have all of the time. So really trying to bring a genuine interest and care in who they are as a person and an athlete and a student and as a human makes a big difference for a student athlete in buy-in to my program and a want to strive for growth as a team. So yeah.
Any of you ever read the book Conscious Coaching by Brett Bartholomew? He's kind of a big weight training guy. Ironic, his wife is a Titan alum. Any of you that know the Thornburg family, their oldest daughter, Liz, is Brett Bartholomew's wife. But he's kind of big in the weight training world, and he wrote this book called Conscious Coaching, and he broke down like all these different personalities that you deal with in athletes, and like how different approaches that you should take with them. And that's a really good resource. He's got, I don't remember like the archetypes that he came up with, but there's some really, really good stuff in there. But
we're good friends with the Thornburgs, so my wife bought me that book, and it's pretty dry. It's hard to get through, but it did have some good points.
It is tough, but if you guys keep going, there's an entire series called The Art of Coaching that you can, and it has video and everything like that. You take a lot of notes from, and at least you can kind of pick and choose what you want to listen to and stuff. So, but it's pretty good.
We got to cut him a little slack. I think that was his first book. So
true.
All right. Any other thoughts, questions, comments for the day?
thanks to our host.
I just set up a Zoom call. So if we graded this like a leadership academy class, we would be very pleased because we heard a lot of different voices today. So that's always our goal in leadership academy, is to hear a lot of voices. So appreciate all the voices and all the input and all the thoughts. So I think that's what helps get us all better as we go. So, but nobody has anything else?
What's the assignment for next time?
Let's read through part 2. So, that sound good to everybody? I think it's all pretty easy readable. I think the other thing that I'm going to challenge us to start thinking about is, I've always been somebody who's taken the mindset that if you just learn to learn, it's kind of a waste. So we go through all this and don't do anything with it. My mindset is we kind of wasted our time. I don't think any of us are going to take that mindset. I think we're all going to do something with it. But I even think just from a bigger scale, how do we start to do something, back to one of our very first conversations, more department-wide. And so maybe start, and it could piggyback off a little bit of what we talked about on last Tuesday. But I think that's something to start, I don't know, just bringing some ideas to the table about, is what could this look like for us to actually take to our athletes. So, but we'll go part 2 next. So sound good?
Coach, what are you thinking about for time next week, since our schedule is going to change?
Oh yeah. That's a great question. And we got Coach Pullman here, so we can kind of work around his schedule a little bit. So my thought process is we could use Monday, because we don't, so Coach Pullman, what's changed on our end is they've kind of scheduled out our day in terms of when we're supposed to meet on Zoom with kids. And I mean, we can stick with Tuesday, Thursday. It's just going to have to be after, I don't remember who's scheduled on Tuesdays and Thursdays in the app. Oh, math is. I'm a math teacher. I should have known that. So really trying to think if we've got any other math teachers that are typically on here. So I might be the only one that's impacted. So we could actually stay with 1 o'clock. Oh, Coach Young, you've got stuff going on with.
Or Altman, whatever.
Altman.
Oh, sorry, John. Sorry, John. So if we maybe, if we could go back to it, if we could start at like 1:30 on Tuesday, Thursday, we could stick with Tuesdays and Thursdays if we want to stick with those. Coach Pullman, I don't know what that looks like on your schedule. You're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, that's fine. That'll work.
Okay. So we want to go 1:30
I like
Tuesdays
that.
and Thursdays? Okay. Perfect. All right. Thanks, guys. Everybody have a great day.
Thanks, Coach.
You too.
Thanks, Coach.
Clem, where'd you get that hat?
He's
That
muted.
thing is sweet. Is that in the bookstore, or did you have that made?
No, I was trying to remember. I think I traded. Mr. Johnson had some, and I gave him one of my hats, and for a trade for one of these. So I don't know if I don't know if he still has them, or a VA had them or something. It was either VA or Johnson, but I swapped a hat. I gave him one of mine, and he gave me one of his.
So you're saying I should get my hat from like 2003 when we opened and give it to him,
There you
and
go.
then he'll give me one of those.
Something like that.
Yeah. Sweet.
Yeah, hit up Mr. Johnson.
Well, thanks, man.
You bet.